Hello, music lovers of the world. Welcome to episode 25 of What Makes This Song Special. As always, I'll be taking a song and talking about what it reminds me of, what makes the song special to me, and then you can leave in the comments what makes the song special to you. I'll talk a little bit about the song itself, and usually I would talk about the singer, but I'm not going to do that this week, and there's a reason why, and I'll explain later. So I'll take you straight into the story. It was around about 1996, and my mate Michael Oakley, Mike, who I've mentioned before, Mike and I were in a band at the time called Morph, M-O-R-F, Michael Oakley, Rico Frankie, very innovative of us. We had this kind of like synth, but I played guitar and sang, Mike played keyboards and sang. It was kind of synth-based of its time. And one morning, Mike's dad had kindly offered to give us a lift to a record fair, and a record fair was something that I wasn't really aware even existed. It was a world I wasn't used to, but Mike loved this type of stuff. He used to go and buy old limited edition bootleg vinyls, cassettes, CDs. I don't remember exactly where this one was. I feel like it was in Kelvin Grove or near Kelvin Grove Park in Glasgow in the West End. I might be wrong, but it doesn't really matter. We were looking for anything rare by Queen, The Police, New Order, because Mike liked New Order. Probably a few other artists that we were keeping an eye out for that would have been coveted by us at the time, but probably too many to mention. So I don't remember if we found any of the types of music we were really looking for, but I do remember us finding something that kind of changed our lives for a while, and it was a game for the PC called Duke Nukem 3D, and this was like a first-person shooter, one of the first of its kind. It was a pirate version, of course, on a series of floppy disks that you had to install onto your computer. I feel like I explain old school technology quite often on this channel, so maybe I'll leave the description of what a floppy disk was. You can maybe Google that if you're young and don't remember floppy disks, but essentially an old type of data holder before CDs came along and before huge hard drives became a thing. You could sort of install things on your computer or save things to a floppy disk. So completely new type of game for both of us. Before this, we'd been hooked on things like Mario Kart, Football Manager games, as well as like Sonic and Mario Brothers and Streets of Rage and Dizzy, the egg from our very first Commodore 64s. And this was such a huge step up in terms of sort of realism from those games. Thinking back to what the graphics would have looked like now, probably terrible in comparison to what's available now. I think of like my son's got a PS5 and it's just, like real life graphics, but I suppose back then, because you hadn't seen that, you had nothing to compare it to. Duke Nukem 3D, even though it would look probably dreadful, as I said now, was amazing. It was so realistic. You could do all these things. You could walk about like it was you in the game, and you could shoot things and shoot people and all this stuff. Great fun. And that we went back to Mike's house that day, and we started playing it, and we were, as I said, blown away. And Mike had managed to find some rare CDs that day too, so we were listening to some of our rare CDs and playing the Duke Nukem game and getting used to that game, which was great fun. One of the CDs that he'd found that day was a David Bowie and Pet Shop Boys collaboration called Hallo Spaceboy. And it was a really strange song. I really didn't like it at all at first. In fact, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I didn't like the song at all. I didn't like the strong English accents from both singers. I didn't like the lyrics. I didn't like the production. You get the idea. I didn't like it. But of course, it grew on me and now reminds me of that day, which I'll tell you the rest of that day in a minute. But which is kind of the point of this show, and I thought we'll pause here and sort of talk a little bit about that, because sometimes we make sort of immediate judgments on art, songs, and photographs, pictures, whatever different art forms there are out there, and we make these judgments based on our reaction to them on a sort of intellectual level. Is this impressive? Could I do this? Does it require a large amount of skill to do this, etc., etc.? And I probably had the bad habit of judging music like this for many years. If it wasn't immediately impressive to me in a way that captured my attention, I would just discard it and say, oh, that's rubbish, and move on. And the lesson I learned over the years, and I suppose the point in this show every week, is that art is supposed to make you feel a certain way. And I don't think that should be exclusive to just the first time you see it. It may be that you didn't like it the first 100 times you heard it or saw it, but maybe eventually it evokes a response in you that's based on a memory, something nostalgic, something that makes you happy or sad or angry or whatever. So a song can be special because of what it reminds you of. And this song, even though I didn't like it as a song at the time, it reminds me of a day. In fact, a whole chapter in my life that I'd love to relive in some ways. You know, like we'd go back to those days as kids, where you just had fun, and there's a song that reminds you of that day or that week or that month or whatever, that time. So anyway, on with the story. I didn't like the song. But that afternoon, we were playing Duke Nukem, listening to some songs. Mike received a phone call to the house phone, which was something that, you know, never really happens anymore. Nobody gets a phone call to their house phone anymore. But it was a girl that he knew from another school, Mearns Castle, which was another school in the south side of Glasgow. And she'd asked us to go and meet her and her friends in Newton Mearns. Of course, we were thinking, well, this is cool. A girl's asked us to catch up, to hook up. And so Mike stayed in Clarkston, and if anybody knows the south side of Glasgow, and Newton Mearns was kind of a couple of villages up the road. So we'd planned our quickest route to the girl's house, sprayed on an entire bottle of CK1, Calvin Klein 1, that Michael had in his window ledge. We just sprayed the whole thing on, applied an entire tub of hair gel each onto our barnets. Thought we looked really cool, but in hindsight probably looked more like Wham, except in the wrong decade for that to be a good look. I remember we took a shortcut by walking across a nearby golf course and then walking up the railway track, which that split the two towns, which is probably one of the stupidest things I've ever done. Looking back, in a moment that I really shudder at every time I remember it. I literally, I cringe thinking about how stupid and dangerous that was, walking up a railway track. But anyway, that's what we did that evening, and we met up with these girls from another high school and thought we were cool and grown up, even though we were about, 14. And I think days like that are just so perfect when you're a kid. You don't quite realise how great and carefree life is at that age until you get older and develop all these worries and stresses with work and mortgages, and you just go around for your mate in the morning and a whole host of things unravels and develops into a full day of adventures. It was amazing. So there's my wee story. It's not a particularly interesting story this week, but that's what the song reminds me of. So that's kind of the whole point of the show. So it evokes memories of that day, being daft, not being too serious, and just having fun as a young teenager. So yeah, that's the story. The song was written by David Bowie, or David Bowie. Different people call him. I don't know. I should have really researched exactly how he wanted to be called. But David Bowie or David Bowie, I've always said Bowie. So, who needs no? He doesn't need an introduction. I'm not going to go into the history of David Bowie. He's kind of musical royalty. So, I won't go into that. It was written by David Bowie and Brian Eno, who's another legend of the music industry. He's a songwriter and producer who's worked with everybody from U2, James, Ultravox, to Depeche Mode, Coldplay, Genesis, and a million others. So Hallo Spaceboy was released by Bowie in 1995, but then re-released in 1996 as a duet with 80s and 90s synth pop act, the Pet Shop Boys, who again probably don't need a massive introduction. I'm sure you know who the Pet Shop Boys are. Both versions are really quite, they're kind of avant-garde. They're in nature, like lots of strange dissonant notes and kind of sci-fi lyrics and production. Kind of a really bizarre song, to be fair. And I think I know why I didn't like it. Even listening to it again to do this episode, I love it now, of course, for all the reasons I mentioned before, and it reminds me of good times. But it is a really strange song. It's a bizarre track. I don't know how I'm going to do a piano version of it. I don't know how that's going to sound, but I'm just going to go for it without any planning and sort of see what happens. So there's a wee bit of background on the song, not too much in-depth background. Normally at this point, I would sort of dissect the singers a little bit and talk about vocal technique, but I'm going to leave that for future episodes where the artists are separate, rather than trying to cram in information about two different singers, talking about Neil Tennant and David Bowie and their voices and their technique. I'm sure there'll be songs that, in fact, I know there's definitely another Bowie song and a Pet Shop Boys track that I would probably do a wee story with in the future, and I'll maybe do a wee vocal coach takedown at that point. But at the moment, we'll leave it there. A nice short one this week, but that's what the song reminds me of. That's why it's special. If it's special to you in any way, let me know why it's special to you. For me, as I said, it reminds me of a kind of fun day that sort of points at how easy it is to just have fun when you're a kid or a young teenager, where you can just go around for a pal and wander into town and have a bit of fun and find a video game or a song or whatever, and then meet up with some girls in the evening and have a good laugh. It's just stuff that I suppose childhood's all about, and that's what the song reminds me of. So there's my wee story. Click part 2 up here for my version of Hallo Spaceboy, and I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you next week for another song and another story. Thanks so much.